The order that shouldn't exist. 3 days after the conference closed in Atlantic City in 1947, a clerk at a polar weather detachment stamped a memo, internal only, and slid it into a pouch bound north. The language sounded harmless, provisional operating caution for flights above 80 degrees north, but the routing told the truth. Theater headquarters to group, group to squadron, squadron to flight ops. Then it hit the crews as a line on a chalkboard. Do not cross this band unless diverted, and if diverted, report by code word only. Look, I'm gonna tell you something. Orders don't travel alone. They leave fingerprints. The header carried a docket number tied to frequencies and tolerances, wording that mirrors the International Radio Conference at Atlantic City, 1947. Dry, right? But inside that dryness was cover. Administrations were told to manage interference, adopt temporary practices, and avoid harmful publicity while they sorted allocations. You give a cautious colonel that phrasing, he can build a fence in the sky without filing a NOTAM. That's what this looks like. Chain of custody matters. The signature block was initials, not a name, but the distribution list read like a roster: polar route planners, weather, navigation, comms. A captain in ops logged receipt. The same captain initialed a change to route Bravo North, bending at 20 minutes west for flights staging to Thule. 2 weeks later, squadron diaries started using new fuel figures for those legs. The math had a ghost in it. Extra reserve burned on days that were clear, no storms, no headwinds worth noting. Somebody drew a line and the airplanes bowed to it. Meanwhile, something else was happening in the logbooks. Pilots began filing weather deviation against blank horizons, boilerplate. Diffuse aurora observed, elect to remain west of activity. But the aurora wasn't the cause, and they knew it. The phrasing was insurance, safe words for a thing they weren't supposed to name. One entry stands out. A supply flight from Meeks Field northbound reports horizon lights failed, gyro unreliable, ADF wandered. Any one of those can happen. All three, same coordinates, same latitude band, then a forced dogleg. That's procedure born of fear, not weather. To understand why, we need to go back to those Atlantic City pages. The radio rules carved up bands, yes, but they also handed every administration a polite shield. If interference or safety requires, adopt provisional measures internally pending coordination. Perfect. You don't publish a hazard you can't explain without revealing your own tests or your rivals. You just detour quietly and blame the sun. That's how the memo read between the lines. Operations to coordinate with communications for northern segment adjustments. That sentence should not control a map, but it did. Cross-check the paper with the paths in the air. Polar route strips archived by a ferry wing show a repeat kink. At 80 degrees north, adjust track 5 to 7 degrees west for 1 hour, then re-intercept. The handwriting changes from neat to hurried right at that note. Crews flew it so often it went muscle memory. And when you overlay those kinks onto a bathymetric chart decades later, the curve follows the Gakkel Ridge under the ice. Nobody in 1947 had that seafloor picture, but they had needles that wouldn't settle and radios that went thin. The ridge was steering charged particles. The airplanes only felt the shove. What nobody knew at the time, or couldn't say on paper, was that the cover stories were standard issue. Weather as a cloak. Polar cap absorption expected. Ionospheric disturbance possible. The memos used those phrases like duct tape. One-line even cites recommendation under Atlantic City proceedings to minimize emission conflicts in high-latitude sectors. Translation: do what you need to do up there, but keep it quiet. If you think that's a stretch, read the printer's note that arrived a year later. Per authority, remove banded caution from civil editions. That authority traces back to the same administrative bucket the radio rules created. There's a detail here that stuck with me. A navigator wrote in the margin of a chart, tiny pencil script, red band ahead, eyes on. Not regulation, not a report. A human telling the next human where the stomach drops. Right after that note, the fuel plan ticks up and the ETA slides. He didn't argue with the order, he adjusted. So is this a myth? No. It's logged procedure with names, dates, and a paper trail that hides in polite language. Internal only, provisional, coordinate. Remove, every verb is careful. Every decision points to a corridor everyone flew around and nobody admitted existed. But there was one problem the memos couldn't fix. Early that winter, a transport cut it close. Crew radioed they were stepping through static. Then silence. Recovery found them far west of plan, fuel figures that made no sense. The official line cited auroral effects. The squadron diary scratched a second line. Avoid previously discussed sector. That's not folklore. That's an order you only write when you've already decided the sky has teeth there. If the order was real, and the paper, the routes, the fuel all say it was, what made them draw that line in the first place? The flights that went sideways. If the chalkboard line was policy, these were the days the sky enforced it. 3 flights, different crews, near the same band above 80 degrees north. Same cascade. Instruments go soft in a sequence that shouldn't line up, and then just as fast, everything snaps back like nothing happened. Are you sitting down? Because once you hear the language they used, you'll feel what they felt. Case 1. Winter of 1948, a ferry hop pushing north out of Meeks Field. Weather was clean, high, thin aurora, nothing heavy. The navigator clocks a slow creep on the directional gyro, 2-3 degrees off every few minutes. He trims, it slides again. The automatic direction finder starts to wander left-right like it's drunk. Then the radio, first the chatter thins, then the signal-to-noise flips. They can hear their own carrier hum louder than the ground station. The pilot calls a hold. Static wall, the log reads. Not a phrase you write unless you hit something you can't name, then a minute of dead air. They come back hot off course to the west, fuel burn high, and right after the weirdest line, red band on horizon prior to onset. A band, not a curtain, not sheets. A band. Stakes, 4 souls in a cold shell over black ice with no feature to fix on. If the compass lies and the radio won't hold a lock, your world shrinks to one bad needle and a guess. Their choice was blood simple, turn into the empty or skirt the band. They skirted and lost time and fuel they needed. Case 2, summer 1949, long daylight, crew out of fuel on a supply leg. Comm solar reports. This is where it gets crazy. The altimeter starts stair-stepping in tens of feet, pulsing like a heartbeat. Gyro holds for 30 seconds, then slips. The pilot levels by feel, old-school hands heavy on the yoke. The radio, carrier present, modulation absent. That's how they wrote it, like someone was flooding the air with a tone that 8 words. Then sudden clarity. Everything locks solid. It's like the band took its bite and let go. They look down at the drift mark. They've jumped laterally. Track shows a clean dogleg with no input they can explain. Fuel math, off by enough to spark an inquiry. The paperwork calls it electrical interference expected with auroral activity. Except the IANO service that day filed quiet. Action in the cockpit. You can hear it in the clipped notes. ADF unreliable. Reset DG, verify mag. Reacquire beacon. They're fighting ghosts. Then visual smear low east. He sees it, the red. If you've ever watched 630, nanometer auroral glow, it's not the green sheets everybody knows. It's a diffuse, blood-warm smear, oxygen atoms taking their time to let go of light. Under the right particle rain, it can sit like a band. And if a plasma duct sits under it, radio turns to soup. That's the theory. For them, it was smear, avoid. Case 3, early 1950s, a weather recon hardened crew who have seen it all. They log it like a checklist of failure. DG diverges, ADF spins, transmitter range collapses. Then a human line, like a red belt ahead. They punch into it anyway because the numbers say they can. 5 minutes later, the aircraft lurches sideways, not turbulence, not roll, just a lateral slip the pilot swears he didn't command. When he lands, maintenance finds antennas heat tarnished, no fire, just a bluing that says RF bath. Instruments and nose show faint scorching at solder points. No cabin burn, no lightning strike reported. Insurance gets involved. The airline mouths Aurora, cuts a check smaller than the damage, and everyone keeps their job if they keep their mouth shut. Why does this matter? Because the pattern doesn't behave like the usual suspects. Auroral absorption, sure, we've known about polar cap absorption since the war years. It can chew HF to bits. But it doesn't usually pin itself to a narrow corridor for months, then years, and reach down to nudge a gyro and mess with an altimeter's sense of pressure. Magnetic storms can spin a compass, yes, but not with the neat onset crews kept clocking right when the red band appeared, and not on calm days when the K-index barely blinks. And yet every time the recovery feels surgical. Action, impact, reset. The walls close in, the instruments lie, the radio turns to tone, and then pop, clarity. That's the part that haunted them. If this was random weather, you'd get mush, not edges. Edges mean structure. Structure means something is guiding particles and energy into a lane. Now remember our ridge under the ice. The Gakkel Ridge doesn't care about airplanes, but it cares about charged particles. A crustal feature can steer field lines just enough to stack a duct in the same place, over and over. The impact ripples out of the cockpit into lives. One of those crews filed what they called a quiet report, separate from the official. The captain wrote a letter to his wife he never mailed. We fly around a thing they won't name. He tucked it into a flight manual. His son found it decades later, after the atlases had already scrubbed their faint caution marks. Another crew's family got a settlement with a clause that barred them from discussing navigation anomalies. That clause sits like a bruise over everything we know. Meanwhile, commanders learned the dance. They didn't say red band. They said company route east or adjusted northern segment. Settlement lawyers used act of nature. Cartographers got per authority, remove banded caution. And pilots kept drawing the same dogleg with pencils that got dull right at 80 degrees north. Trust me, you're not ready for the last kicker. Every one of these flights reports the same sequence. Gyro first, radio next, then altimeter drift, and then sudden clarity. In human terms, that means the line had a personality. It took what it needed, then let go. That's not myth, that's behavior. We need the physics on the table now. If nature can't cover it, someone used nature. If nature can, we need the mechanism. Either way, the red band wasn't just a color. It was a boundary, and it made the rules. The map that changed overnight. While crews were flying doglegs nobody would name, the paper world blinked. Civilian atlases in the late 1940s carried faint corridor markers, hair-thin hatching across the top of the globe, the kind of caution bands you miss unless you traced routes with a finger. Then one publishing cycle later, they were gone. Same publishers, same plates, but the banded caution quietly vanished. No errata, no note, just a clean white cap where trouble used to live. Cartographers talk to each other in pencil notes and printer slips. I've seen margin lines that say more than a press release. One printer's slip from a respected house reads, "Per authority, remove banded caution." No authority named, no statute cited, just per authority. The phrase lands like a stamp you don't argue with. Look, I'm gonna tell you something. Map editors don't erase lightly. If they take a mark off a globe, someone convinced them the mark would cause more harm than good. Meanwhile, aeronautical charts did a different dance. For a couple of editions in the late 1940s, you see restricted test layers up near the cap, thin overlays with altitudes nobody flew anyway. Then revision hits in the 1950s and those layers evaporate. The airspace above 80 degrees north looks as clean as a new runway. Pilots still bent their tracks in practice, but the public chart said the sky up there was open and honest. Unknown to them across town, maritime folks felt the same nudge. Notices to mariners carried parallel advisories, radio irregularities expected in sectors that rhyme with our corridor. Then those advisories vanish in the same quarter the atlases scrubbed their bands. Shipping companies love simplicity, insurers love it more. If a risk line disappears from the notice, premiums smile. A clean chart lowers costs, even if the water hasn't changed. Here's where the plot thickens. This wasn't one country washing its hands. The pattern shows up across the United States, the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union in the same narrow window. Different languages, different bureaucracies, same outcome, remove the band. That's coordination without a press conference. That's a phone call, a pouch, a nod. And if you're thinking, okay, but maybe the science improved and they realized the caution was wrong, fine, let's test that thought. The flights didn't improve. The doglegs kept showing. The quiet memos kept using the same boilerplate. The only thing that changed on paper was that civilians stopped seeing the warning. A retired map editor, careful man, careful words, remembered a red bar note on a polar inset that his team pulled after review by administration. He didn't say who. He said the instruction came with sample language to replace it. Polar phenomena variable, consult current bulletins. That's not a fix. That's a shrug. And it matches the legal cover born out of 1947 in Atlantic City. When administrators get a polite umbrella to adopt provisional measures and avoid publicity, cartographers get quiet replacements for blunt warnings. There's a human moment in a binder from an airline's chart office. A clerk initialed receipt of a packet labeled Northern Segment Harmonization. Inside were paste-over decals, yes, literal stickers to cover a dashed caution near 80 degrees north. She logged the application date, then wrote, "Looks empty now." She wasn't wrong. The paste-over didn't change the air, it changed the eyes. While that was happening in New York, a Soviet atlas dropped a shaded belt at the cap between editions. Their reason? Update to polar geography. Geography hadn't changed, policy had. And when you line up those editions side by side, the erasures march in step. That's why we don't call this noise. It's coordinated policy in print. Why does erasure matter? Because maps are memory. When you clean a map, you clean a mind. A young navigator in the 1950s learns from a world where the red band never lived. He plans fuel without a phantom reserve. He trusts a compass that will lie in one place it's not allowed to exist. And when something goes wrong, the blame lands on him, not the blank space that swallowed his radio. You can feel the stakes in a simple invoice. An underwriter recalculates a polar premium after removal of special band in civil editions. Fractions of a point become real money. Shippers smile. Airlines open routes. Governments get the best of both public calm and private control. The corridor stays off the books, but on the chalkboard. Get this, one draft atlas proof shows the band faintly, like a ghost the engraver couldn't fully lift. Under raking light, you can see the scrape marks where the plate was burnished. Someone literally smoothed the warning out of metal. If you're looking for a metaphor, you don't need one. The tool marks are the story. So yeah, the paper trail didn't scream, it whispered. Per authority, remove, harmonize northern segment, update to polar geography. And across 3 flags, the same white space spread. Okay, that's the paper, but paper doesn't cause gyro to drift or a radio to turn to tone, which means the science fight starts now. Natural explanations put to the test. So cards on the table. If nature can carry the weight, we don't need a conspiracy.